What's the worst advice that you've ever been given for writing?
And what was their name specifically and address, and tell us everything about the person.
Never worry about making money from your art. Just do your art and maybe the money will come. And I tend to feel quite poorly about that type of advice. I literally have no other skills.
You have this great story about how you got published. If you want to dive into that for our viewers.
Brandon Sanderson said that this was the most Brandon Sanderson book yet. I want to hear what you thought about that.
Yeah, like I was tickled pink.
We're his student and then becoming more friends with him.
Relative levels of our careers have stayed the same because now I am quite a successful author and Brandon is 50 times more successful than I am. And so there's always been this like level of slight intimidation there. I'll be totally honest.
Yeah.
My novellas per hour make me a lot more money than my novels do.
Whoa.
I don't think I do that well romance. Epic fantasy, a lot of us are awkward neckbeards, you know? We don't know how to make this stuff work.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Tutor Ramble, episode number 54. 54, that's a big one. And this is your host, Richard, over here. And this is your other host, that's me, Austin. And we have a very, very special guest today. We are absolutely honored to have author Brian McClellan on the podcast. Brian is most well known for his two trilogies, The Powder Mage and Gods of Blood and Powder. But as of last year, he stepped outside the realm of gunpowder and ventured into the realm of glass. His new series, aptly titled The Glass Immortals, has the first book, which is called In the Shadow of Lightning. Now, this book takes place in a world where magic is finite, and now it's running out. But only the very elite, in this case the powerful guild families, have this knowledge, and this finite magic, known as Godglass, is forged in different ways. You've got wit glass, which makes your mental capacity smarter. You have certain Godglass that augments your physical strength, and you even have Daze Glass, which gives you a high. It's basically fantasy marijuana. And so this book has all sorts of great magic and dives into a very incredible world. And it follows some characters. There's a detective, a soldier known as a breacher, but our main character is Demir, and he's a self-exiled outlaw who now has to return to the place Osa. And his mother just died. He has to solve that. He has to solve why is magic running out? How do I figure that? And it's just chaotic. Now, Brian has a whole bunch of other novellas and a bunch of writing. He writes a lot, blah, 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 whatever. But you know what Brian also does that I have a serious moral problem with, Richard?
What's that?
He has a competitor podcast. He is the enemy.
Oh.
He has a podcast called Page Break with Brian McClellan, and he's trying to just take our viewers from our very hands, and we don't appreciate it, but Brian will welcome you begrudgingly.
Well, thank you very much.
Of course. And I want to start right off with your podcast, actually, because looking into how you started your podcast, we'll get into a ton of writing, I promise. But with your podcast, you started it more as you don't want to give writing advice or tips. There's plenty of those out there. You seem to have started it from a standpoint that, comedians get on the pod, they talk about their lives and hobbies. So I want to get right from the get-go and talk about your hobbies. I know you're a big gamer, for example. Like, what game are you playing now, and are you loving it?
Oh man, I game way too much. It tends to be my stress relief. Like a lot of people like come home from work and watch TV for 4 hours kind of thing. I'm very much to play video games. And I kind of jump around in genres. I did a full playthrough. Actually, I didn't actually beat it. But Cyberpunk 2077. I did that one over most of February, I think. But I really enjoyed it. That was fun. But I'm normally I like survival games. I like city builders kind of thing. I spent last weekend, I spent the entire weekend playing Oxygen Not Included, which is a goofy little kind of survival city builder sort of thing. Valheim is one of my favorite games ever. I did a massive playthrough with a bunch of my old high school friends over right after their new expansion came out. We played for a good 2 months, and that was what we did like almost every day. So yeah, I don't know. I jump around a lot with video games. I'm one of those bizarre people. Like everybody plays games in a different way. and how they enjoy it. And like I've got a friend who tries to 100% every single game he plays. He gets like all the trophies and stuff on PlayStation and all stuff like that. I play games until they start to get boring. I'll love a game, and then like I did with Cyberpunk, I played it almost to completion, and then one morning I just woke up and said, I don't really want to play anymore, and so I didn't beat the game. Part of that was I know that there's like a big expansion supposed to be coming sometime this year, and I figured I'll get back to it then. So I don't know. I love games. It's just like I said, it's the way I unwind. I kind of do. I like the mindless puzzle nature of a lot of like city builders, especially. It kind of takes me away from what I do for a living, which is trying to construct narratives. And why I never finish RPGs, because it feels a little like work, because the climax is always really story heavy. And I'm like, I don't really want the story. I just want to go around and stab bad guys. So yeah, I do. I love games.
Is there been any video game that inspired any type of story that you wanted to write?
Oh man. Maybe. I try not to think too much about kind of work when I'm playing games. Occasionally I'll have this fantasy of going and working for like a video game company for a few years, doing narrative development stuff for them. But it always kind of that fantasy never lasts longer than 3 or 4 days. And then I'm like, yeah, I don't think I'd enjoy that. Maybe someday I'd do a little contract work for a video game company or something like that, which would be good. But no, I vaguely related, when I first got Promise of Blood, when the contract first came through and I was speaking with my editor for the first few times, the book was already finished. When you sell a first book, it's almost always got to be finished. And so I went to my editor and we were already discussing covers and things like that. And she said, give me ideas for covers. What's in your imagination? Just throw stuff at me. I probably won't use it, but I'll just spitball. And the thing I told her was the promo work for Skyrim. I don't know if you guys remember that, but it was the guy with the horn helmet on a mountain peak with the dragon tail up around like his leg or something like that. And I said, this is super cool. Like, this is something I think it had come out pretty recently. And I'd love you to do something like that. And, we didn't get super far from that with the lone character sitting in kind of a dark area. And you can see over my shoulder, over this shoulder, Promise of Blood. So yeah, that vaguely related to your question.
Well, no, I absolutely loved the cover. I will say for me, I saw the cover in the Barnes and Nobles, and that's what made me pick out the book personally. So, and I found just in the whole genre, it's realistic characters, like realistic art for a book cover typically doesn't look as good, and it's very difficult. But I thought yours was particularly well done. I think especially because the shadow covers the face, makes it far more appealing.
Well, I kind of agree with you. I don't want to badmouth Orbit's art department because they're awesome and I love them. But they especially around the time my books came out, they were really leaning into the photorealistic. They would do photo shoots of a actual person and then put that onto a digitally created background. And that's what they did for my Powder Mage books, the first trilogy. And honestly, they did it for a lot of other books, and I very rarely like it. It usually feels kind of crummy to me. But yeah, I love how my books turned out. Maybe everybody says that, but
yeah. Sure. Relatively recently, do you have any thoughts on the whole AI art debate? Because that's been brewing lately, especially with, I believe it was Christopher Poloni, his book had that AI art situation that occurred. And of course you're aware of that. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh man. It's such a tough thing to talk about because it gets, cause I'm not an artist, I'm an author. And if you ask the same exact question about AI writing books, I've got a million opinions that I think are valid because I do this for a living.
Yeah.
when you get into the AI art stuff, it's, like it can really fire up people, this whole
Yeah.
conversation. Like the thing with Polini's book, I don't tend to get too much into the weeds on these things, like the internet debates and stuff like that. But just from a lay person's, like it seemed to me like they just used some like background stuff that happened to be AI generated, which honestly, that doesn't seem like a big deal. It's like it feels to me like just doing stock art, which they grabbed stock art for all of my covers that have the digital stuff. You can see behind me like the flags and the cannon and all of that stuff. That some of it is created by an artist. A lot of it is stock art. I don't actually know which is which. But that feels very much like the same moral level as using stock art. Now, if they're going fully AI developed covers, that gets a little bit trickier, because then there's nobody working on it, no human working on it. From a very capitalist perspective, fantastic. We can cut out any more cost. But from like an emotional perspective, you're like, man, I kind of want my art to be created by people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. It's a tough thing, and I have no blame for artists for getting fired up about the whole. Yeah, I don't think that you should like go after like Tor's art department because of something like that, because it, like I said, it felt very stock art. It's just a normal thing that they've been doing for decades. But yeah, it's a tricky debate. It's a tricky thing to kind of like, I've talked a whole bunch on Page Break about this. I don't know if actually those episodes might not be out yet. But
little sneak preview,
sneak peek.
Yeah, they might. I think because I've got one, as of, I don't know when this will go out, but from our recording right now, I think on Tuesday, I have a conversation with Django Wexler about, we talk a bit about AI. And then I think next month, I'm talking with Ken Liu a lot about AI, because he's a futurist. Yeah, it is. It's a very tricky thing to kind of figure out where you stand as an artist, and trying to look into the future and see how, if that's really going to completely destroy your industry, or whether it's kind of a flash in the pan for a brief period of time. Nobody has any idea.
Where do you think the AI's use will come into play with art authors themselves?
I mean, I've got a buddy of mine, one of my old high school friends, who he talks about this AI stuff all the time. He's super obsessed with it. He loves fiddling with all the free things online. He's constantly reading about the new developments that have been made public. It's interesting because his kind of opinion seems to be, as much fun as he's having from it, the biggest effect that AI will have on our lives is that it'll make a lot of things easier, in terms of like busy work. Honestly, like digital busy work, having an AI write an email for you, that sounds fantastic. Right. You just like these things that are little constructs in our life that we have to spend time on, that really don't require you to have that much of a personal touch. If you're just you're jotting off a quick email to somebody who just needs to know some information, and you can have your AI write it from, you put in a few words, and then suddenly the AI just does it for you, and you give it a quick edit. That sounds great. I would love that to be part of my kind of business life, right? Mm-hmm. But again, that's probably not exactly what you were asking with the whole how does it affect an author thing. Honestly, like I said before, I have no idea. I feel like the AI with writing a completed novel, probably a lot more complex than an AI creating art. And I'm not saying that to like say that art is less in any way. Like digital art. but I think like creating a picture is probably a lot easier to train an AI to do than creating an emotional narrative arc, and with everything feeling right to it. So I mean, I hope that I will be dead before it destroys my industry, and hopefully that won't be soon. But yeah, so I don't know. Who the heck knows what that's gonna look like over the next 2 decades.
Yeah, so as part of your business side and your personal side, something that I found really interesting is that you don't read as much as you used to, being an epic fantasy author. So that hobby, how has your writing affected the enjoyability of reading for you?
Oh man, this is one of those things I genuinely, and I talk about this on Page Break a bunch, because it genuinely bothers me that when I was young, probably until the time I was about 23, 24, I read voraciously anything I could get my hands on. I just powered through massive books, huge series, everything. And then right about the time that writing became my career, right about when I was 25 or so, I found it less enjoyable to read. It was like, oh, this feels like homework to me. Like this doesn't feel as enjoyable to me anymore. And I think, honestly, that's to my detriment. Reading, a lot of authors will tell you that they read to get inspired. And reading does inspire me. When I can get myself to sit down and read through a book, I often come out the other side saying, "Oh man, they do some great things with this narrative device. They've got a cool character that I would love to steal little bits of and sprinkle into one of my books." There's lots of ways to be inspired by reading as a writer, but like I said, it kind of started to feel like homework, and so I just, over the years, I've kind of stopped doing it. And every so often I'll pick something up, and I'll like last year I reread the first couple of Malaysian Book of the Fallen, with I just forgot the title of the first book. Gardens of the Moon.
Gardens of the Moon, yeah.
Gardens of the Moon. And then recently I picked up and was doing a little rereading of the old Conan the Barbarian, the original ones, and so like occasionally I'll do some rereading. I'll try to look for some inspiration and stuff, but man, I really struggle with making myself read anymore, and really I kind of wish that wasn't the case. I miss reading. I miss just taking literally like 3 days straight and laying in bed, with that way you do when you're a teenager, where you contort yourself into the weirdest positions. Your legs are up on the wall and your head's hanging off the edge of the bed, and you're trying to like not let pieces of you fall asleep because you don't want to stop reading. I genuinely miss that kind of thing.
Is there any particular author that it's a little easier for you to pick up their book?
I mean, the ones that were my favorites right at the start of my writing career, that would probably be Stephen Erickson, Joe Abercrombie. I love Robert Jackson Bennett. He's fantastic. But even those guys, I don't pick them up as much as I used to, and it's not great. It's at some point I keep telling myself, okay, you're gonna start catching up on the really great stuff that has been coming out. I always feel bad because when I first started Page Break, I told myself,
Brian, if you mention Page Break once more on this podcast, so help me God,
everyone's going
losing
over there.
Everybody. Sorry to ruin your train of thought. Go ahead, Brian.
No, it's all right. When I first started Page Break, I told myself, okay, I'm going to start reading a book by each of these authors that I invite on, and then I just never did it. And I it's one of those things where you kind of want to, but also, man, I have been stupidly busy the last few years. I don't feel like I have that like kind of time to throw into that kind of thing, because doing a podcast, as you know, is a fun little hobby, but holy crap, I have a real job. I've got to actually write the books. So it's, and again, then when you try to do something, when you say, okay, I'm going to read for my podcast, then suddenly it's homework and you're not enjoying it as much.
I see.
So I don't know. Someday, hopefully, I will really kind of rediscover my love of reading. I know it's in there. I do occasionally listen to audiobooks, but almost never fiction. It's always nonfiction. So yeah, it's like I was talking about before with video games. Like my unwind time has now become video games. It's just
Right.
That's how I kind of unspool all that creative tension in my brain and kind of let it just seep out into a game. And occasionally I'll put on a podcast when I'm playing something I know really well that I don't really have to focus on. I'll put on a podcast or I'll put on an audiobook or something like that. But yeah, it's weird how you kind of change as you get older. And even like, I literally work in the field that I probably should be reading in, and I just don't.
Well, with your writing process, and so the lack of reading, but writing so much now, how is your approach to when the deadline's coming? Because I know you've talked in the past of if there's no deadline, and you've mentioned to let some of our viewers know, you can't really force yourself to outline. How does your writing style work, and what's the difference when you do have a deadline versus you don't have a deadline? How does that affect your style?
I don't know. It kind of depends on kind of where I'm at, kind of emotionally and kind of physically. It's complicated is the short answer. With deadlines, so editors in publishing, because it is a creative work, they're very aware of this. And so editors tend to be reasonably forgiving about deadlines if you give them warning. If you say 4 months ahead of time, hey, look, I think this book's going to be 2 or 3 months late. Your editor, generally, they're not going to be a dick about it. They're going to say, okay, well, we'll slot you into the next quarter after, what we had assumed was going to be your publication date. They'll work with you. It's when you get to the point where you're 3-4 years late that then they start saying, hey, you have an actual contract you signed, and we're going to have to evoke this clause that lets us out of it, and you have to pay us back. That will eventually happen, but it tends to not be like in normal business. You blow past a deadline and maybe they'll forgive you a week. But in publishing, it tends to be a lot nicer, a lot more forgiving. I did that with the Powder Mage books. I tended to always be like 3-4 months behind everything. And honestly, the first couple of books that freaked me out. But then, I kind of got used to working with my editor. I got used to, knowing when to say to her, hey, this is late. And her being, oh, okay, cool. Because if you go up and the deadline is tomorrow and you send an email saying, I'm going to be 3 months late, they're going to be rightfully pissed at you.
Right.
But like right now. So I've talked about this a bit online and on my podcast that back in, I think it was September, I ended up in the hospital with a previously unknown heart defect that required heart surgery, and while I was in the hospital, my brother died, and so it was a horrible week. Oh, and my wife went in for emergency back surgery the same week, so it was a disaster of a week with kind of far-reaching emotional implications. And honestly, my editor and my agent were really cool about it. And they both came back to me and said, look, we're going to take book 2 of Glass Immortals. We're just going to take it out of production. We're going to take it out of the schedule. You take as much time as you need to finish up, deal with the stuff that you've got going on in your personal life. And then once you've finished the book, hand it in and we'll put you back into the production line. And honestly, that's incredibly nice. It shows on my editor's part, it shows that she trusts me to get back to it and get it done in a reasonable amount of time. But also just, it was very kind for them to say, look, we understand you're going through some shit. And so yeah, so that's like where my current book is that like I'm way behind on it, but thankfully, you know, my professional kind of contacts are being kind about it, and I'm still hoping to have it finished sometime during the spring, fingers crossed. You know, I got a Glass Immortals novella out that I had written last summer, and that'll be out in May. I did a Kickstarter for it in the fall, and
is that the baby one?
Yeah, that's Montego.
Yep, Montego. Yes.
Our
favorite character, by the way, by far.
Yeah.
He is my favorite side character, and funny enough, he's the character that has survived all. He's the side character that has survived all iterations of the original book. Because when I pitched in the Shadow of Lightning, the original pitch was, I think it was 60,000 words or something like that, and that's what I sold the series off of. And then I ended up completely scrapping it and rewriting it using the same main characters, but with totally different plot lines and stuff like that. And Baby Montego was like the only side character that survived that. And it was my agent who basically said, look, this is the best character that you've got going, so you definitely can't lose him.
Right.
That was actually when we had your book for our book club, all of the patrons actually said that we'd love to have a novella of Baby Montego. Then we looked it up, like, oh, there is.
Yeah.
There is one.
Yeah, no, he's fun. He's just it's fun. I've always every one of my series has a big dude that is enjoyable to write. You know, like in the original Powder Mage trilogy, you've got Mihaly as the chef. In the second trilogy, you've got the Ice Baron. I'm trying to remember if I have another one in the second trilogy. I don't think so. I think it's the Ice Baron. I mean, Ben Stike, but he's not like a fat dude. He's just huge. But I always like having a big fat dude in each of my books.
What was the name of the friend of Adamat in the first trilogy?
Oh, do you mean his bodyguard, Sousmith?
Yes.
Yeah, the boxer. Yeah,
the boxer. I also was thinking of him. He big, strong dude, but just kind of a lovable personality. Just really good, honorable guy.
Yeah. So Baby Montego comes from this very childish place in me from when I was a teenager and I first saw The Matrix. I had this very dumb daydream of them making, like, it was like an SNL skit in my head of a massive fat dude dodging bullets, just like very fluidly moving in the screen, like having bullets just shoot past him. And honestly, that is kind of where Baby Montego comes from, because he's impossibly fast. He's just massive. Well, I mean, he's a sportsman. He's basically a sportsman in which a sumo wrestler is, you know, cudgeling is, they're more sumo wrestlers are kind of what you're aiming for these sportsmen. And so Montego is that, but he also, you know, was a world champion that retired. And so he's kind of gone to seed, you know, like he's let himself go totally. And, but he's still this amazing athlete, despite, you know, kind of, you know, weighing 400 pounds or whatever. I don't know. I love him as a character in every way. He's great.
And you really do tease the reader there with, he's past his prime and still that strong. It's like, what was he like in his prime of primes? And I know you said in the past, you said as for In the Shadow of Lightning that Kizzy was the easiest to write. Tessa, and sorry if I'm saying Tessa wrong, is it Thessa? Thessa, correct?
Tessa.
Oh, Tessa. So Kizzy was the easiest. Tessa was the hardest to write. But what makes a character easier or harder to write for you?
Usually connecting with their narrative, you know, because each character has to have things that are driving their narrative, right? They have to have, you know, a quest they're going on, whether that is physical or spiritual or mental or emotional or whatever. They have to have something that drives them. And honestly, like, Kizzy was super easy. I have often found that my investigative sort of characters are the easiest to do, and maybe that's kind of my childhood love of Sherlock Holmes. But in the second Powder Mage series, Mikkel was by far the easiest to write, and honestly, he became the most fun once I especially when I got to book 2 of that series. So Kizzy, it's really easy to latch onto. There is a mystery that you have to kind of unfold, and those characters, I don't know, that's really easy for me to do. Somebody like Tessa was really difficult, I think, because her role. I'm really good at writing action stuff. That's like my bread and butter. And Tessa really didn't have any action stuff. She's not a passive character, but her work is all kind of like in a workshop or in her head, and that's a lot harder for me to write. I was actually working on one of her plot lines for book 2 very late last night, and it was one of those things where I've been trying to tease out what I'm doing with her in a more concrete fashion, and it kind of finally clicked last night. I had a scene that I had rewritten a couple of times because I wasn't happy with it, and it was like, oh, this finally works. And honestly, it's hard to describe what's different about it, but I think it's the physicality is really easy. With Kizzy, she is both a physical person, but also she's moving between places. She is unraveling a mystery and fighting bad guys and doing these things all at once. Whereas, Tessa's not, taking a knife to anybody. It's got to be all, I've got to make research interesting, and that can be difficult.
Yeah, you really explore the world with Tessa more so than any other character. It's very, very fair to say. And it's something with your writing process. You mentioned this when you initially had your 60,000 words for In the Shadow of Lightning, but you tweeted out in February of this year saying, I've spent the last 3 months working exclusively on book 2 of Glass Immortals, mostly exploratory writing and plot fiddling, just did some Scrivener organization, and I'm sitting at 55K words of deleted scenes and 52K words of finished work, which I found fascinating that you as a professional author, you're usually deleting just as much as you're actually writing toward the story. What does the end product usually look like of how much stays and how much goes?
Well, honestly, that's not normal to me at all.
Wow. Okay.
I hate rewriting it. I've never been an exploratory writer. I tend to do most, and this is for Powder Mage. For Powder Mage, all 6 books, I tended to just do a lot of thinking. And just kind of sitting around puzzle solving in my head until I felt like I had pretty much everything. And then I would just vomit it out. Yeah. I've never liked the rewriting process. I can do it. It doesn't bother me. I wrote Sins of Empire. I've told this story a few times, but Sins of Empire, I wrote an entire book. I handed it in, and my editor said, "This is really crap." And I said, "I know." and she gave me a couple of months to think about it. And I came back to her and I said, "I think I have to rewrite this from scratch." And she said, "Oh, thank God, I didn't want to tell you." And so I did, but I rewrote all of Sins of Empire from scratch, getting rid of everything except for literally just the main characters. They were the same people, but they did everything differently, in about 4 months. And the book I wrote in 4 months is basically what people read. Very few edits on it. But I had to that was the first time I had ever gone through a, holy crap, this entire book sucks. I'm going to just scrap it and write from scratch. And honestly, I can do it, but it sucks. And Sins of Empire, so Powder Mage, that was the only Powder Mage book that I really did that with. And then, but with this new series, In the Shadow of Lightning, I probably have a good 200,000 words of deleted stuff from that. And then the sequel, I'm probably up to 250, 300,000 words of stuff that's unusable. And just in my Scrivener docs, it's just buried in there, all these scenes that I've written and then gone, no, I didn't like that. But so I guess my process has changed a bit. I'm not sure if I'm happy with that or not. Maybe I'll go back to the old way of literally not writing for 4 to 6 months at a time, just letting it all percolate in my head and then vomiting it out. But who knows? At the moment, still tons of rewriting, still working through things, and I don't know. We'll see if I continue to work that way. Book 2, I had hoped was going to be like back to the Powder Mage version of basically think about it and then write a single good draft that gets some edits. And that is not happening at all.
Well, I know with your writing process, here's another tweet from you. We dug into Twitter. We like going into people's Twitters. It's a good source of people's thoughts, right? So
right.
We saw it in March. You said some days your writing time is just hours spent playing word association games with yourself and staring at pages and pages of synonyms trying to come up with the perfect names for fantastical elements. So a lot of days, how many days are actually spent not writing where you're just sitting there going, man? Like, how often does that happen?
So this is a weird thing, and I don't actually know. I think some authors feel this way as well, but this might be something that's just one of like kind of my weirdness, in that I have always had a problem with feeling like if you're not doing the physical act of writing, you're not actually working. And this consumed probably the first 6 years of my time as a professional author, and this idea that literally the physical writing is what matters. I've kind of changed that, and I think weirdly it has helped me write physically more. Is kind of forgiving myself when I have days where no writing happens, where I just I check a few emails. And then I play video games all day. And then maybe, after about 10 p.m., I spend, 3 hours jotting down notes, little things that I might use. And honestly, those days happen. Those are probably 4 out of every 7 days is just days where I'm thinking about what's going to go on. I've been better at trying to even on those days getting, 500, 1,000 words, down. I tend to think in terms of my own ability to write. I tend to think of about 3,000 words as a full day's work. Like yesterday, I did 4,500 words in about 3 hours, and it was late at night, and I kind of felt, and I just kind of got in the groove, and I just did it, and other days, you struggle to get, 200 words of the notes down. It's just sometimes the narrative clicks and it just flows like super easily. And those are the days that I really enjoy writing, and I kind of save myself up for those days. There's a lot of authors who will force themselves to write 500 words a day, no matter what. Doesn't matter how they're feeling or whatever problems they've got in their personal lives or anything like that. And I have a huge amount of respect for that kind of consistency, but I have found that I cannot do it. There are just sometimes I need to just say, you know what, I am taking this week off from physical writing. I'm still going to run my business. I'm still going to do the things necessary for me to make a living, but it's not going to be the physical act of writing. And that's a weird place. Like I was saying, because I came from an early part of my career where the physical act of writing was work. That was the only thing I considered work. And now I'm a lot gentler with myself on that of saying, you know what, the physical act of writing doesn't actually take you very long. You can write a huge amount in small periods of time if you've lined it all up in your head and you have the narratives working properly for yourself. And so I think I spend a lot more time thinking about stuff, thinking about the narratives, thinking about trying to make it work. And paradoxically, it means I actually write a lot more, which I think is where this thing of rewriting, especially in the Glass Immortals, has come from, is that I'm I'm paradoxically so much more forgiving of myself that I actually get more done.
Well, a lot of authors can give out some of the best writing advice that they want to give, but on a little twist, would love to hear what's the worst advice that you've ever been given for writing.
Oh man, the worst that I've ever given myself or been.
Oh
given?
no, what you've got? What's the worst
Oh.
writing advice that you have been given?
And what was their name specifically and address, and tell us everything about the person. So.
Man, you know what? I don't know. That's really tough. Yeah, like I think as I kind of get older and I'm in this career for a longer period of time, I tend to, and maybe I actually feel this way about the world as a large, not just the writing career, but I tend to think there are no absolutes. Some advice is great for some people. Some advice is the worst for other people. For me personally, there is a style of writer and artist, general creative, who says, never worry about making money from your art. Just do your art and maybe the money will come afterwards. Maybe you'll make a living. And I tend to feel quite poorly about that type of advice, because I do this for a living. I literally have no other skills. I have to know I have to have a pretty good idea that my story that I'm working on is going to pay the mortgage for a period of my life. And that's kind of how I approached things from the very beginning of my career. Was this needs to be a living for me. I don't want to work as a fry cook for the rest of my life. I don't want to work unskilled labor, doing crappy jobs that I hate. I really need to make this work. And I do. And I still, I've been in this career I've been published for almost 10 years. And so in the career for probably around 12 now. And I think about that all the time. I need to make sure that I'm making money from my writing, because otherwise I'm screwed. My whole lifestyle will be destroyed. I won't be able to make my mortgage. I'll go back to, crappy writing or crappy jobs. So I tend to think that the financial side of being an artist needs to be something that you think about and that you really kind of internalize if you want to make a living from it.
You have this great story about how you got published. If you want to dive into that for our viewers on that initial offer you were given and your intro into the publishing industry, can you share that story?
Oh man. This is one of those things, is I've told this story so many times that I'm sure that I change details because your memory gets weird as you get older.
Totally. Yeah.
But so I apologize, because this story has probably been recorded a dozen times now. So I apologize to anybody who's like, this doesn't sound right. Okay, so I got published. So I wrote Promise of Blood. I want to say it was in 2010. I think I wrote Promise of Blood, and I sent it out on Query. And I was incredibly fortunate because I sent out a single batch of queries. I think it was 17 queries or something like that. And I got 2 offers of representation from just that small batch of queries, which this is me bragging. I'm very proud of that.
Yeah. Also, I have noted here was 15 queries, so you changed your story already.
Dang it.
I think I heard you say 15, 20, 50. All right, so 17 queries, yeah.
All right, so the details are fuzzy. It's been over a decade. But so I did this. So I got 2 offers of representation, and one of those offers came from the agent that I genuinely wanted. Like, she was like the top agent for me. And so I ended up taking her. This Caitlin Blaisdell of Lisa Dawson Associates. She's awesome. We've worked together ever since. And so I took this offer, and it was very funny because I think I was maybe 24 at the time, something like that. And my agent, after I said yes to her, we had our first serious business call, and she said, "Okay, Brian, your clearly talented, but you're also very young and need work. So we're gonna work on this book. And she made me do rewrites for large sections of the book for probably about 9 months. And I think the whole summer I was unemployed. And you're a poor kid, barely out of college, no real skill set. And I don't know how old are you guys?
We're 24, 25.
I'm 25.
Yeah. 24,
okay,
25.
So you guys don't remember how like millennials got totally screwed by the economy in 2008, 2009. Everybody who graduated right around then was just absolutely screwed. You get out with a crappy English degree in that economy and you were just, you could not get a job nowhere. Nobody wanted you. So that was a very rough time because I'm like, Caitlin, you said that this is good and I can sell it, but we're doing rewrites and honestly, like, at that point, I'm not making money for her, so I wasn't her priority. So, I would do a rewrite of 7 or 8 chapters, send it to her, and then it would take her 3 months to get back to me. And then eventually, one day, she finally said, "This is very good. I'm going to send it out." And she gave me the whole agent spiel, which is basically, look, you don't hold your breath. This can take months. It can sometimes take years. I have a lot of confidence in this book, but that being said, it's still possible it doesn't sell, but we're going out. Just forget we had this conversation and go back to your normal life. And like 2 weeks later, we got an offer. And the offer was for $100,000 for 3 books. And you got to imagine when you're this poor college student with no prospects, hearing those numbers, you suddenly go, like, your brain explodes.
Yeah.
And, my wife and I are dancing around our little tiny apartment and we're like so happy. And I get on the phone with Caitlin and I said, okay, well, so this offer, we're going to accept it, right? And she laughed at me and she's like, no, Brian, we're going to get a lot more money than this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, seriously? Like, don't risk this.
Right.
But she went back and we ended up going to auction. I think there was 3 houses that kind of got involved with this auction. And we ended up with a very good contract. Not the best. Like there's bigger contracts that happen all the time. But for a brand new epic fantasy author, very good contract. So then I ended up with Davey, my editor, who honestly I still work with, even though she's at a different publishing house now. She's the one who purchased the Glass Immortals series and is my editor now again with Tor. But I ended up with Davey. We ended up working together really well. She's great. And Davey kind of she kind of worked me through the paces. I did a bunch of rewrites on Promise of Blood with her as well, just trying to kind of get the narrative right and work out the kinks in my own creative process. And then it came out almost 10 years ago to a month from now. Yeah, because I think it was April. It was like April 13th or something like that, 2013. So we're closing in on a decade. So that was basically the very long-winded version of me getting published.
That's not, I mean, that says something to your skill as a writer that within 2 weeks you got that response, which is just super awesome and fortunate. And we are called To Ramble. Something you just said there, you said April 13th. This is a complete off topic. April 13th, Return of the Kings, returning to theaters. Just wanted a quick thing to see are you a Lord of the Rings fan? Are you going to go watch it in theaters? Like, what's the deal here?
Honestly, I saw that announcement last night and I will probably mention it to my wife and see if she's interested. We'll see. We both love Lord of the Rings. I went and saw Lord of the Rings in high school. I think my parents were pretty strict when I was in high school, but so the idea of leaving from school to go watch a movie, like that was always a no-no. They let me go for Lord of the Rings. Like they were very cool about it. So I do. Those movies are fantastic.
Yeah, Richard and I already got the back center seats already locked up at our local theater. We're about to have
nice.
It's going to be great.
And we, us being 24, 25, we couldn't see it in theaters. So this is completely first time ever for us. Grew up with these movies. Oh, can't wait.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Absolutely. And I'll leave it to you because I've been asking a lot of questions. Go ahead, Richard.
Sure. Well, you were talking about the writing process, and I thought it was interesting that Brandon Sanderson actually said that this was the most Brandon Sanderson book yet, which I want to hear what you thought about that.
Oh, I mean, like I was tickled pink, right? Like, like that's a very cool thing to have somebody like Brandon say, So, because Brandon is so incredibly busy, that it's very hard to get a hold of him. It's very hard to kind of nail him down for anything, for good reason. And so when we sent him in the Shadow of Lightning, I genuinely did not expect him to even pick it up. And so when I got an email back from him saying, "Hey, I absolutely love this. This was great." Actually, I think it was a text first. I think he texted me and said, "Hey, I'm going to give you a blurb for this." And like that was the text. And
Right.
and then hearing later from him saying very nice things about the book, that was very cool. Which very funnily, he might have been one of the very first people after my wife to know about this book. Because I asked him to go to lunch with me. This was like 6 years ago, maybe. I think it was right after I moved to Utah, which would have been 6 to 7 years ago. And I said, "Brandon, I have never written anything outside of Powder Mage. I've designed this new kind of world. Would you go to dinner with me and chat over the magic system that I've kind of created and this kind of background and all that stuff?" And we talked about it. I think it was me, him, and Isaac, his art director, who's a very close friend of mine. I think we talked about it for a good 3-4 hours, and we kind of shot ideas back and forth and all that stuff. So Brandon was one of the very first people that knew about this series at all. And so very cool to kind of have it come around and him say, "Hey, you did a good job on this thing we talked about years ago."
Yeah, Sanderson might have texted you. We've been talking to George R. R. Martin and Joe Abercrombie. They've been texting us on the side, so it's whatever. No big deal.
I mean, it's not that big of a brag because I live in Utah, and I literally live 5 minutes up the street from him. And he's reasonably involved in kind of the Utah writer crowd and all that stuff. So it's not a huge flex or anything.
No. I've played with you. You were in his class, of course, right? You were like in the second or third year.
Yeah. How's that transition been from? How did that? I'm just curious how that goes. Where you were his student and then becoming more friends with him and more writing colleagues. How'd that kind of feel going from being his student to being a colleague of his?
Well, honestly, a little bit odd. Like I've always been quite a shy person. And so even when I was his student, I didn't really talk to him that much. Like I handed things in and we communicated almost entirely with email and, when he would give reviews of the section that you handed in and stuff like that. But then also like, going kind of becoming a professional author, and going through that, like I always felt incredibly intimidated because Brandon, when I first met him, he was a brand new author, and he was a brand new author, but he was published, and so I was this college student down here looking up at Brandon, who's this big author guy now, and he's making a living from books. And
imagine how we feel talking to you, but okay.
But like it's like the relative levels of our careers have stayed the same because now I am quite a successful author and Brandon is 50 times more successful than I am, and so there's always been this like level of slight intimidation there.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
That is pretty funny. Well, Sanderson also recently had this the whole Audible situation where he's releasing some of his secret projects and whatnot, not on Audible. I wanted to see what your insight was on the Audible. I know we're asking you like AI and all this stuff, but thoughts on the more, I guess, controversial topic of the Audible situation? Is it controversial?
I mean, it's controversial in. I don't think it actually is that controversial because Audible has a monopoly,
right?
And it actually quite sucks. Like even though they're owned by Amazon, Audible has always been way shittier to authors than even Amazon is. And because Amazon has that, you self-publish through Amazon, you can make 70% of the sticker price. And with Audible and with Amazon, you kind of always know exactly how much money you're going to make. You can look at all their reports. Everything's very transparent. Audible, not so much. Audible, they are constantly running whatever deal that they've got going on. You never really know how much money you're actually going to be making from them. Even if your contract, I think the best contract they have is you make 40% of sticker price, but the sticker price depends on what sales they have going on. It depends on it's completely different depending on if someone buys your book using a credit than if they do it with cash. It's very, very hard to know anything about what's going on with Audible. And that's why Brandon was taking a stance on it, because they've got this monopoly where they treat you really crappily compared to their own sister company. And that's pretty infuriating. It's always infuriated me, but like, what can I do about it? Like, my self-published books, they sell a few thousand copies in Audible. Like, I'm not even a drop in a bucket. But Brandon actually has serious clout, and he's able to like talk about these things without harming his bottom line. And I'm really glad he is, because it's a problem. It sucks for everybody that works through Audible, because they're crappy. and I say this as someone who does make a little bit of money self-publishing on Audible, and my audiobooks that are published through a regular publisher, that's mostly Audible as well.
Yeah, I've looked into trying to find alternatives to Audible, and there are a few out there, but it's definitely difficult because so many Audible books are under contract and exclusive to Audible. So the books that you really want to listen to, they just aren't on other platforms, and it makes it very difficult to switch over.
Yeah. Well, they got in so early, like I'm not 100% sure how all the business stuff worked with that, as compared to Amazon's publishing wing. But it did feel like Amazon's publishing wing, they did get in early, but they had competitors very quickly, even though they're still 90% of, kind of the industry, the ebook industry. There still are other places that have, from near the beginning of ebooks, you've been able to kind of use and go to and try something different. I don't think that was the case at all with, kind of audiobooks. I think Audible kind of was the thing for so long. Nobody really competed with them. And now, anybody who is trying to compete with them is so late to the race now. Trying to get something going is really hard.
And you made the point that this is a business for you. So that advice of, hey, don't think of writing as also business, but it's how you make your living. Does that ever, obviously it affects it in some way, but how much does it affect whether you decide to write a novella and spend your time doing that, which makes a lot less money than your powder or even the Glass of Mortals as well? So that's going to make you a lot more money, obviously. So how does that affect how you spend your time writing certain series?
I'll be totally honest.
Yeah.
My novellas per hour make me a lot more money than my novels do.
Whoa. Okay. I had the wrong assumption entirely. Oh, wow. Okay.
And the thing is that I tend to only write novellas when I have a fully realized idea in my head. And I can sit down and do all the work in like 2 weeks. I think that I think most of my novellas, I think all of them have taken less than 2 months of total work time to kind of complete and take care of and all that. With Montego, I mean, I'll let you kind of do the math on it, but Montego, the Kickstarter, I think hit $36,000. And I'm going to guess that it took me, maybe 4 solid work weeks, 40-hour work weeks to do all of Montego, to get everything done. And so, $36,000, you take a lot out of that for shipping and stuff like that. But even $25,000, that is a very good month. but I can't do that all the time. Like I said, I like to do these things when I'm ready to make it happen quickly. And I don't have an infinite amount of great ideas to throw little novellas out all the time. I would kind of love that because that's a great income. But yeah, it's but like the gigantic novels, they're still my bread and butter because that's what people really latch onto and they love. And so once I've established a universe, I can make some extra money from it by doing these novellas, and I find it quite fulfilling. It's a fun thing to do side stories, to explore other characters. But yeah, it's once I've established this universe, that's one of the ways that I kind of monetize it is by doing these little extra things.
Yeah, I didn't even think about the ROI if it takes so little time in the grand scheme of things. So that makes so much sense. Now, Richard, you want to go into the quick segment here of we have some patron questions to ask you directly from on our Patreon. We had In the Shadow of Lightning. We read it for the book club of the month, and we let our patrons, and we couldn't ask all their questions, of course. We picked the best of you. No, we actually got a question for most people. So, Richard, you want to ask the first one from our patron Jangled?
Yeah. So Jangled wanted to ask you, if you had to pick one, which Godglass would you personally want?
Ooh, that's tough. That's really tough. There's because the idea with Godglass, I'll try to actually be quick about these, but the idea with Godglass is basically that each one enhances a human being's natural trait in some way. It makes them stronger and faster, or it makes them think quicker. Kind of like there's lots going on there. Honestly, probably Cure Glass. Cure Glass enhances your natural healing. And because it's a fantasy world, I don't put a whole bunch of asterisks after that. It just Cure Glass takes care of you. And I've got rheumatoid arthritis, where my own maybe this is actually too complicated, but my body actually attacks itself because of this illness I have, this hereditary illness, and if going off of the rules of Cure Glass, how awesome would it be if I could just spend an afternoon in a healing house and I don't have rheumatoid arthritis anymore? It fixes all my joints, nothing hurts anymore, all that stuff. I think that's like the best quality of life answer. But honestly, any of them are awesome. The idea of Forge Glass, making you stronger, faster, making your body sturdier. Wit Glass probably would. Wit Glass would probably help me write, but also I just forgot what it's called because I think it only comes up like once in the book. There's a Godglass that enhances creativity. I've got it in my notes somewhere. I think I do only mention it once. But the idea with Godglass is that there are hundreds of Godglasses. There's only a handful of really common ones that everybody uses, but there's all these different mixtures, and kind of lets me as an author just pluck cool ideas out when I need them. Maybe a little bit of a writing hack. But yeah, so I'll just stop rambling and say Cure Glass.
Well, hey, you're in the right place to ramble.
Ramble. That's what we do here, to the ramble. And I do like that about Godglass, that it enhances. It doesn't make everyone the same, right? It just enhances your actual abilities. So that's neat.
Well, with somebody like Idrian, Idrian is naturally a very athletic, powerful person. And that's one of the reasons why he is such an effective breacher, is because the Forge Glass that they give him makes his natural athleticism so much better. That's why he's faster and stronger than most any of his enemies, is because he already is a bit in real life, and then that's accentuated by the Forge Glass.
Absolutely. And we have another question from our patron Andy, who is asking you, where does the inspiration for your characters come from? Which we touched on very slightly, but if you want to elaborate more.
Oh man, we could talk about this for 2 hours. It comes from everywhere. I like to pluck little things from mostly media that I consume. It tends to be TV these days. It used to be a lot more books, but like we've already mentioned, I don't read as much as I used to. But for characters, I tend to take little pieces of characters I like in other settings. And I think most authors do this, where you say, oh, this character is really fastidious about a particular thing. That would be fun to do with this other character that I've been kind of designing on the side. There's a lot of that where you're just plucking little bits from things you find cool and trying to make it work.
More specifically, where did the inspiration for Demir, your main character, for In the Shadow of Lightning, come from?
Demir, honestly, a lot of that came from listening to the Revolutions podcast. So the Revolutions podcast is this great podcast where each season, where they go really in depth about a single revolution. And when I was really doing most of the design work for the world of Glass Immortals, I was listening to the French Revolution, which I already had a pretty good knowledge about. Like it was a huge inspiration for Powder Mage. But the podcast kind of let me into the nitty gritty a lot more than I had kind of even been aware of. And I became fascinated by these kind of larger than life characters that you run into over the course of the French Revolution, some of which, kind of made their way through the whole thing, others of which were executed very quickly. But I'm very interested by these thinkers, these people whose whole existences kind of poured passion into trying to create a better society. And I think Demir comes a lot from that. This idea of someone who he's politically very brilliant. He has these amazing instincts for how to govern and how to handle. He's actually a very good people person, which I'm not, funny enough. But I loved this idea of a political thinker who was like a maverick at what he did. Like he is ready and willing to kind of push new ideas and kind of disrupt things. But also, as anybody knows who's read the prologue of the first book, he had a mental breakdown and completely destroyed like everything about him. And then we get this character for the rest of the book who is a former genius, like very well known as a genius, whose life just completely broke apart almost a decade before the events of the actual novel. And now he's trying to kind of, reconstruct that and figure out how he goes forward, having, suffered this massive trauma in his early life, and then a new trauma of his mother being murdered right at the beginning of the main book. But also carrying around the weight of this reputation for having been this absolute genius. Like he was a governor of a province at 14. Like this, he was a kid genius. And I don't know. I love like lots of different ideas go into somebody like Demir. But kind of that's basically where he came from, is the thinkers that kind of push you through a real life revolutionary period.
Okay. And we have another question here from Raffle. And he wanted to know, what is something in your writing that you're really proud of, that you do well, and something that you need to improve on?
Oh man, I do action very well. And this, I have not made any secret that I'm quite proud of my action. I'm pretty good at balancing very cool action scenes that don't drag on too long, so that they don't bore the reader to tears. Because that does endless action generally bores people eventually. Like the exception that proves the rule is Mad Max Fury Road. And
movie.
Fantastic.
It's one of my favorite movies ever.
Yes.
But like, so anyways, not to digress, yeah. So I'm quite good at doing action. I tend to default to action, maybe too much. We talked about this earlier with my struggles with writing Tessa. The thing that I have very little experience with, and I don't think I do that well in any of the texts that I've written, is romance. I've got a close friend. She's a huge romantic fantasy author, Charlie Holmberg. And I honestly, whenever I'm working on something that's romance, I'm always texting her, and I'm like, how do I do this? Like, how do I make this work?
Right.
Like, it just doesn't. I'm not good at it. I really would like to be better at it. And honestly, it's a very particular skill set that I think a lot of people that don't read romance kind of look down on. But also, romance is like 50% of the fiction market. So clearly, it is in high demand, and it's not something I have a good skill set for.
Well, it's definitely the trope of the fantasy genre. It tends to be that the romance aspect is typically not as well developed, or at least not as practiced.
Right, and you get, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot to talk about there, and I don't say any of this critically. Like, this is just stuff you're trying to work through as you're kind of dealing with these things. Epic fantasy, a lot of us are kind of awkward neckbeards. We don't know how to make this stuff work like in real life. So how are we going to make it work on the page? And so, yeah, so you just, and I think that's maybe the history of, romance in fantasy, especially epic fantasy, that we all like grew up, that people, especially like in the 90s, grew up reading. A lot of people go, oh my gosh, how was that okay? But yeah, so you try to work through this.
Yeah, we've got just one last patron question for you. This is from our patron Curtis. And mind you, he does know this is Brian McClellan, not George R. R. Martin, but he wanted to ask you, when is Winds of Winter coming out for some reason? Just, I don't know. He's interested.
Not my problem.
Great way to end that. And as inspired from your podcast again, you usually end with the question of what was the last great meal you had. So we wanted to put we thought of something. This is the best we could come up with. But what was the last compliment you got that really stuck with you?
Oh man, the last compliment. Gosh, I don't know. I've got such a poor self-esteem. I don't really remember compliments.
That's why I thought it might have been a bad question, because me thinking about it, I couldn't think of one either.
Well, here, I'll throw one to you.
Throw it to him, Richard.
I'll throw you a compliment. When I first read your Powder Mage trilogy, the first 3 books, I was real ripping ready to go into the second trilogy, and then I read that Vlora was going to be a main character, and I was so emotionally attached to Taniel Two-Shot. I was like, I'm not ready yet. I have to give this a breathing period, because I really emotionally connected to that character, that it was really hard to move on to different characters. And so I will be breaking into that series next. It's one of the next series to read.
Honestly, that's a thing I've heard a lot, like that, and it was a thing that I was very aware of going into the second trilogy. That a lot of people didn't like Vlora because of the events of the first trilogy, and honestly, because I kind of had already lived in her head, just knowing the way she felt about things. You get a bit of it on the page, especially in book 2, in Crimson Campaign. But because I had already lived in her head, I knew her motives. I knew the kind of shame she carried around from being a young, dumb kid. And so it made me really want to write her. It made me want to put her on the page as a main character. Because people do stupid things. And because someone does a stupid thing that affects the character you've fallen in love with, it's very easy to hate them. And I get that, but also I really wanted to jump in and say, look, Laura's like her own human being. There's a lot more complicated emotional stuff going on there than we knew about in the first trilogy. And that was very fun to kind of deal with in the second trilogy.
Certainly. Especially since you're seeing Vlora through Taniel's eyes mostly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you're gonna feel a certain way. I imagine, of course, when you actually get to be from her POV, you're gonna get absorbed into her perspective. So
Yeah.
that was something I'm looking forward to. That now enough time has passed, I can emotionally get past it.
Oh yeah, no, and it's funny because I do allude to this, I think, in Honor Republic, but Vlora is actually more of Field Marshal Tomas's heir than Taniel ever was. Taniel went off on his own adventure, and he kind of became this minor celebrity as a mercenary practically in a different country. And Vlora is the one that stuck around and learned to command armies and actually be a officer rather than just a powder mage. So I had always kind of thought of Vlora as Tomas's heir in terms of his career. And that was the other reason I wanted to kind of follow through on that in Sins of Empire was seeing what happens to her when she's older and more experienced and kind of fulfilling this role as a commanding officer.
Yeah, that is something to say too. The whole compliment thing of, oh man, what's the last one? I'll end it with this. You mentioned neckbeards. Listen, the fact that you and Richard are able to grow, I feel a little insecure. You guys got great beards, so don't ever say that about yourself. Okay, Brian, it's a great beard. Great job on the genetics there. Good job, buddy.
Oh no, I am very proud of my beard. My beard's great.
It's pretty nice.
Yeah.
And also, do you guys love how I blew past that question of the class compliment that was paid to me?
Oh, absolutely. I wanted to. I noticed something very much that Richard would do too.
I just dodged that.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for coming on the pod. This has been super enjoyable. We're honored. And Richard, if you want to sign us off.
All right, yeah. Thank you guys very much for watching. And if you want to go down and comment down below, there'll also be the link to In the Shadow of Lightning in the description below. Let us a comment. What do you guys think? And we'll catch you guys in the next episode.
And Brian, if you just want to finish it off with a goodbye, promoting anything that you've got going on, and we'll close it on you.
Oh man, well, thank you again for having me. It was a pleasure. For people that have not read In the Shadow of Lightning, they can go and read that. That's my latest epic fantasy. The people who have read it and didn't support the Montego Kickstarter, they can go pre-order the hardcover from my website. They can get the audio and the ebook from all the normal places, and that will be out at the end of May officially.
Awesome. All right, that will be on the screen in the description for everybody. Thanks for joining.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.